That's the role of the CFO, to be kind of an overseer of all those things, directly connected to the heart and mind of the pastor, so that, let's just say 4 years from now, if you saw yourself, having launched, I don't know, 4 campuses between now and then, or having planted 3 churches between now, do you in fact have the financial base in place today that could actually happen? And that's a CFO. It's more long term. It's not as much day to day.
Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome back to Distilled, Church Finance Made Simple. I am so excited for another year of conversations around church finances and how to keep every dollar on mission. We've got some fantastic content in store for you that I think you're going to love. And today, we're kicking off a 3-part series with Jim Sheppard from Generis and our very own Dustin Alexander. They're going to be talking about the role of a CFO within the church and how it can help propel your mission and vision forward. So let's jump in.
All right, welcome. Today we are talking about a concept that is critical to every church's future. We're talking about financial foresight, but this isn't really about like counting pennies and seeing where you've been. It's about funding the vision that God has given you. Our guest today is someone who truly understands how to take the complex world of finance and put it into the context of service of the spiritual mission. He's had a remarkable journey. We were just talking about it to where he is here after being in the corporate world and climbing the corporate ladder in C-suite leadership with a background in accounting and even passing his CPA exam. He had been in the marketplace as a CFO, and he's pivoted since then and dedicated over 32 years of merging business acumen with faith, helping churches, mobilizing over $2 billion in contributions. He is the co-author of Contagious Generosity and the chairman and principal of Generis. Please welcome Jim Sheppard. Welcome, Jim.
Dustin, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. Jim, I gave the background there a little bit, but I'm sure you put it much more eloquently. If you would just tell us a little bit more about your background and kind of what you do there with Generis.
Yeah. So I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, of all places, the home of the Masters golf tournament. I went there. Look, Masters, I don't just wear it. It's like what I've been doing. 7 years old when I went for the first time, but I had no idea it was a big deal. Went to the University of Georgia, enrolled in the business school there, graduated with a degree in accounting, minored in finance. Passed the CPA exam shortly thereafter. It was certified a public accountant when I passed it. But today, when I think about it, I think of couldn't pass again. That's what I think. It's hard, man. I don't know. I don't even try. But I didn't become a Christ follower until I was 28 years old. And interestingly, as I became a Christ follower, God began I could sense even then, Dustin, that God might be wanting to do something different with my life. And I was in the corporate world, as you mentioned there, and I ended up in my final job before I moved over here into Generis. I was senior vice president and CFO of a large financial services organization, one of the 2 divisions of a large financial services organization. And they got bought out and reorganized in summer of 1992. They moved my job to New York City, so I didn't have a job anymore, and moved over here into what was then a very, very small organization. And it wasn't even called Generis back then. That's been sort of a series of morphings over the years. But I was one of the first consultants there. I was one of the first 5 there, and thought that maybe I would do this for a few years and then move back into the corporate world. And that's just not what happened. God has never really released me from this. And there was a lot of fruitfulness in my life. I had been a part of a church restart, which essentially became a church plant. So I'd done everything in the life of a church except be on staff. And I knew all this about finance and accounting. And so God seemingly took the intersection of those 2 and said, let me move you over here to a place where I can really use what you do. And over the last, 3 decades, while I get hired primarily for giving development, my expertise in financial statements and, as a financial executive hasn't gone away. And so I see a lot of financial statements all the time. And, it's interesting the stuff that I see. And of course, you guys are in that business of providing financial and accounting services and even fractional CFO role to churches. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And of course, we've grown our team a lot over the years. I'm now chairman. We just transitioned the CEO role to Frank Beeler. He heads up the firm now. I'm still with the firm and providing a lot of direction and strategic guidance. But Frank and his team are running the firm on a day-to-day basis, and I still work with my clients. I still, after all these years, Dustin, I still love sitting with a pastor for the very first time as a new client and hearing his story and the story of what God wants to do in and through his church, and then talking to him about, hey, how could we maybe develop your people, disciple your people in giving so that the resourcing God wants to provide to make this vision happen could actually happen right here in your church. So that's still fun for me.
And that is such a necessary topic and something that
Mm,
a church shouldn't, and pastors, we shouldn't shy away from these things like donor development, which is really just good biblical stewardship. That's what
yes, it is.
you're doing is really developing disciples according to the biblical principles of stewardship, and so necessary. And we're going to talk more, or I'm going to allow you to talk more and share more about some of these things that you've seen over this
Mm,
career. Our church leaders, they've got to plan years ahead to feed the vision that God has given them. We want to talk about that long-term planning, that strategic planning, and we want to talk about the person responsible for the highest level
yeah.
thinking in a ministry, which is the church CFO. So, kind of given your background as a CPA, C-suite leader, not vocationally CPA, but in that having passed it and been the CFO, you view church's financial health a little bit differently than most, I'm sure. And when we talk about this financial thinking in a ministry, we often hear the title CFO and kind of think of that corporate ladder, that corporate tower. But for a church leader, the financial future is really tied directly to that spiritual vision. How would you define that role for a pastor, and what exactly is the church CFO's mission?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dustin. I'm going to start off with what I see that doesn't work. So one of the things I see out there is I see a lot of people with the title of CFO, but it's not that role. It's not that role. It's really more of a director of finance or a controller type role. And that's not to diminish those roles, but those are different roles. Those are more short-term roles. Those are more day-to-day, keeping up with what's going on roles. And the CFO is not divorced from that. But my view of the CFO's role is more long term, more making sure that the overall financial architecture of the church is in place so that the church is free to pursue its God-given mission and mandate without financial limitation, without financial limitation. And so that means the CFO needs to be looking down the road, not looking at the day-to-day finances and making sure, I mean, things like, our percentage of budget that's going to salary, our percentage of building that's going, a budget that's going to buildings. Those are the two that get churches in trouble the fastest. It's just like in personal finances, the two things that get most people in trouble in their personal life are buying too much house or too much car or sometimes both. So I'll have churches that'll ask me these questions and I'll look at their financial statement and like, hey, have you looked at your financials recently? And let it tell you what's really going on there. And that's the role of the CFO, to be kind of an overseer of all those things directly connected to the heart and mind of the pastor, so that, let's just say 4 years from now, if you saw yourself, having launched, I don't know, 4 campuses between now and then, or having planted 3 churches between now, do you in fact have the financial base in place today that could actually happen? And that's a CFO. It's more long term. It's not as much day to day.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of things there that I want to drill down on a little bit. You talked about the CFO as the financial architect. One, I would love for you to go into a little bit more about why you refer to them as that financial architect. But then also, one of the things that we see on in what we do is that person that is wearing multiple hats, and
Mm.
so that bookkeeper, that controller hat. But why is it so difficult and even maybe dangerous for the same person? You kind of went into a little bit of the differences there. What is it that needs to be, why is that so difficult? Can you speak a little bit more to the differences and why a church should have those roles separately?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think those roles are separate because, for example, I mean, I would say this about me, Dustin. I'm just going to use myself. I was never the best debits and credits guy on my team. That's not who I was, right? But I had people on my team in the corporate world who were just ninjas at that stuff. I mean, they could do it like that, And there's like, hey, so how would you record so and so? And I'd have to sit there and think about it. And I've got 3 staff members that have already figured that stuff out. That's more day to day, right? And as much as I passed the CPA exam, so it wasn't like I didn't know debits and credits. It just wasn't a strength of mine. What my strength was looking at the financial statements and number one, being able to tell the stories that were coming out. So one of the things that got me promoted in the corporate world was that I could look at financial statements and I could tell the CEO the story of what's happening there. Not, hey, so we exceeded budget by 14% this month, and our expenses were down 7%, and our revenue was up so and so. And we had lots of guys on the team that could do that. And what I could say was, hey, let me tell you what I see starting to happen in the numbers that we are not taking into account. We're going to have to react to that. Because when I was in the corporate world, and I'm going to draw this over into the church world in a second, my job was not to keep the books of the company. My job, we were a public company. My job was to make sure that we were positioning the company to hit our earnings per share numbers on a quarterly basis. That was my job. I mean, I could actually not do some other things well, and I could get away with that. But if we didn't hit our quarterly earnings numbers, my job would be in jeopardy. My job would be in jeopardy. So I was more of a long-term thing. Now let's take that over to the church. What I see happening so often in a church is there are three things that I see in a church that I think are just the seeds of financial peril. Too much payroll, too much building, including mortgage. Mortgages are a part of your building expenses, and not enough reserves. Not enough reserves. I have a client that I've worked with in the last couple of years that when we sat down and talked their financials, they would have said they were in pretty good shape, and they weren't out of line on payroll. They were not really out of line on building expense, nor the combination of the two. But when it got to reserves, they didn't have anything. They had 3 weeks expenses in reserve. And that's just not enough. Now, there's a place at you and I both know, there's a point at which there's enough reserves and it becomes hoarding, and you don't want to be moving over into that. But you need to have enough so that if a bump happens, if a rainy day happens, God forbid that another worldwide pandemic might happen. Hope that doesn't happen, but financial things happen, other kinds of things, leadership things happen in the life of your church. You need to have some staying power. And so the CFO's role is to oversee all of that and say, what is going on here that could cause us a problem 6 and 12 months and maybe 2 years from now? That's the real role of a CFO, is to see down the road.